Hey, welcome to Clarksville Vibe the Show. I am your host, Kevin Kennedy Jr., back for another episode. I've got a good friend coming at you this visit. It's one of those relationships that has extended multiple decades. We first met in middle school here in our local public school system, and we've just stayed in contact ever since. That translated through high school, through college, and now we're getting to raise our kids in this great community. So I'm really excited to bring today's guest to you. But before we get there, as always, make sure you go ahead and follow, share this episode or share this channel with somebody that you know, someone who wants more positive, engaging content, who's helped sharing the message of people from this community who really make this place the best place to live in America. We believe it. We believe it is because of the people, and it's my job here at Clarksville Vibe the Show to bring you consistent stories of people like my guest today, like all of our previous guests, who I believe are making Clarksville better in so many ways through their influence both in our local community and then all across the nation. I kind of gave you a little bit of intro to our guest today. He is a friend back from 6th or 7th grade when we were running through the halls being crazy of Northeast Middle School. We went to a few different schools together, and I've just been amazingly proud of him. From the very earliest memories of him, I remember him being super bright, intelligent, just always carries himself well. I have always been envious of his fashion. He outdresses me everywhere we go. I really have to say no to him on formal invitations because there's just no chance that what I show up in will even come close to what he brings to the table. But he's my friend, Dr. Diarese George. Like I said, we've just got multiple long-standing links in our tree of where we connect in multiple ways. And as that Ben Rector song says, you can't make old friends. And Diarese is one of my old friends. We go way back. So I am super excited to have you on the show today, man.
Yeah, man, I'm excited to be here, man. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you. Sounds like you got this down to a science.
Oh, well, I try to. Part of highlighting people is giving people a system that they can jump right in.
That's right.
Because what we want to do is highlight people like you, people like your family. We won't get through this episode without talking about everybody in your family. But man, did you ever think we'd be here? Northeast Middle, Rossview Middle. We actually have a crazy story how many times we changed schools going through Clarksville, Montgomery County schools.
That's right, man. We changed schools a couple times.
That's right.
And I actually, honestly, prior to that, I changed school, crazy story, every year until I got to high school, my sophomore year. So 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. I went to a different school every year. But we went to Northeast Middle, Rossview Middle, Northeast High School.
That's
I
right.
stayed at Northeast High School.
Northeast.
Finally, you went to Rossview High School.
Yeah.
But would have never imagined, one, the longevity of our friendship extension, but then also to just all the things that have transpired over time. So.
Well, and I remember reconnecting with you after we kind of split ways, graduating high school. Now we're back on Austin Peay's campus. And, I was in a fraternity, and I look up one day, and I show up at it was a probate show. It's like, oh, man, probate show. It's the Kappas. It's the smoothest dudes on campus. I'm like, yo, there's Diarese, right? I was so excited. And, we got to spend a lot of time at Austin Peay together.
Man, you may not remember this, but you actually, when I transferred to Austin Peay from UT Chattanooga, and you were SGA president, and you did my tour and my welcome into UC. It was like crazy.
Here we are,
back
back
here we
again.
are, man. We back.
Well, now here we are, man, like 20 years later. Those years creep up on us. You just turned 38. I just turned 38. But I have always been inspired by the trajectory of your career with the demeanor that you just kind of always embody. When we first moved back to Clarksville after being in dental school and residency, our students entered into Clarksville High School, and there was Dr. Diarese George. And I said, man, somebody that I know we can count on to be a positive influence. And the reason that we're having this conversation today, what you're currently doing is continuing your influence in the education system right now from the nonprofit sector, but you kind of earned your wings in the public school system here at Clarksville Montgomery County School System. So tell us a little bit about that early journey in CMCSS as a employee, as a teacher, and then I think you kind of took on some more roles before we got to the nonprofit. But I specifically want to hear, as two graduates of CMCSS and you as a former employee, a teacher inside of CMCSS, how much pride should we have in our local school system?
Yeah, man. First of all, thanks for the question. I appreciate it. I think, honestly, First of all, I would have never gone to college had I not had great teachers surrounding me in CMCSS school system, particularly at Northeast High School. I told you the story. I went to different schools multiple times until I got to high school, finally got some stability. And some of those were like because we moved, and some of it because like there was just rezonings. Yeah. But to be honest with you, I don't know if you remember Mr. Warren at Northeast High School. He's a Latin teacher.
The Latin teacher, yeah, he was a legend.
He's a legend. I remember one day he asked like questions like, where people going to college at? And I mean, I graduated in part of the top of the class, and I was in that ranking at the time, and I had not applied to college at all. And he was like, why haven't you applied to college? Right. I'm like, I don't know.
What am I supposed to do? Nobody's telling me what to do.
You know, the messaging in my household was to graduate from high school. My mom was a teen mom. She lost both of her parents within a year before she graduated high school. So by the time she was even 17, both of her parents were passed away. So the people that you depend on the most to have those conversations and to guide your direction, my mom was doing that for me, but we weren't having conversations about college. Yeah. And so people around me in Northeast actually were the ones who influenced me to even apply to college. And so my educational career would probably have been stalled out a little bit had I not gotten some influence, support, loving, and nurturing at the high school level. Fast forward, I was not a education major in high school. I was a career changer. Yeah. I mean, an education major in college. I was a career changer. Funny story, my wife's actually a teacher. She's a teacher in Clarksville Montgomery County school system. But now she's actually teaching in Metro Nashville public schools. But she was an education major. She had to change her major because while we were in college, she got pregnant. Okay. And she was concerned with working. Yeah. And because of that, she ended up dropping out of school. Because we had kids early on, twins, I changed my major because I was a political science major. And my advisor told me, hey, you might want to consider a different major. So I ended up changing my major to business, worked in business for a couple of years, and then transitioned into education.
Wow. So did you teach some business as a teacher in CMCSS?
I did. I did. That was my job. So
I think I remember that now. As you were doing the business school there in the niche business department at Clarksville High.
I changed careers from business, working in sales, to working at the collegiate level initially, enrolling first generation adult learners. So folks who had graduated from high school, had taken years off, but this was their first at bat at college, and they still were the first person in their family to go to college. I did that for a couple years, and then I got the opportunity to transition into CMCSS to be a teacher. Wow. One of the folks at the central office said, hey, I know you have a business background. We're starting this business academy. Might you be interested? Took the leap of faith, make the transition, and was at CMCSS, Clarksville High School for 6 years. Yeah. Heck of a ride.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about your experience there as a teacher, and, you've had this transition one or two times from, business to then now teaching. How were some of the administrators at that time or the people who mentored you during that time, whether they were in the building at CHS or outside influence, how did they help encourage you that you could devote your life to education?
Yep. I would say I got my early taste working with kids doing summer camps. So at Austin Peay, we did A-Star.
Oh, nice.
So A-Star brought inner city kids to Austin Peay for a week. They got to live on campus. They got to take it. I loved that. Like, for whatever reason, I didn't know I would love that as much, but I loved that. Like you mentioned, I also am a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. I ran and started Kappa League when I was in undergrad. Okay. So that was another opportunity for me to work with young boys. Part of my reasoning to being able to transition is because I saw my boys going older and they started school. I was missing out on time. Yeah. And so I transitioned, and that was my motivation. And then I kind of surrounded myself around the right people. So Jean Luna, Dr. Jean Luna, who's now the superintendent.
She's the superintendent.
She was my principal at the time. Wow. She hired me. Yeah. Shannon Cummins was my assistant principal, was my direct report outside of my department chair. Dr. Brian Johnson at the time was the director of high schools. As a matter of fact, he was a principal at Northwest. But then he was the director of high school. So good friend, close friend, very influential, not only in the work that I did.
Then he became number two,
chief academic officer, and then superintendent in Hamilton County. Yeah. But his conversations and influence were things that drove me to be able to even see myself beyond the classroom and have any insight and perspective of what I could do. To the experience at CHS, it was a great experience. I loved it. The one thing I will say is after a couple years, one of the teachers had retired medically, and it made me, at the time, I was the only black male teacher in CMCS. Not in CMCS. In Clarksville High School. Yeah. And there were a couple other educators of color, but particularly black male.
Yes.
That was me for the last couple of years I was there. And what I realized is, and from the students' voice, not mine, many of them would tell me, hey, you're the first black male teacher I ever had.
Yeah.
And that in that moment made me realize the impact, because the way I dress now is how I dressed then.
Sure.
And it had an influence on kids because they start dressing like that,
Yeah.
and they want to wear bow ties and all that stuff. But more importantly, just culturally, we learned a lot from each other.
Sure.
I predominantly spent a lot of my time in North Clarksville. I didn't spend as much time in South Clarksville outside of my time at CHS.
Yeah.
And so the influence of like learning how kids grew up and meeting their parents and their values came through in the classroom. I think mine did too as
Yeah.
well. And that's kind of when the light bulb started going off, when I started realizing, like, I never had a black male teacher.
Yeah,
I've
don't
never
think I
had.
either.
I had maybe one teacher of color, and the whole time I was in CMCSS, and so it made me appreciate the value of what I could bring to the table and what folks from different backgrounds could bring to the education space for students, all students for that matter, and it kind of led into the work that I do now.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do now. So you're in the nonprofit world, and what I'm gathering is from the launching pad of CHS, these great mentors, people that you looked up to, the feedback that you were getting from the students' mouths, as you said, you kind of captured a vision for how can we put this work into teachers of color and supporting and engaging teachers to be present for our students and help them along their journeys all across the country. But how did that vision start? When did you first recognize some of the skills that you had? And tell us a little bit also about like the courage to take that leap.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I was going down the track to be an administrator. I was considering being an administrator, and that was from the mentorship that I had. You know, Dr. Luna, Mr. Cummins. You know, I was impressed by their leadership and their work, and I, felt like I could do that too, and also was encouraged to do it.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I made a decision towards the end that I didn't want to do it. I did all the coursework, but I never took the licensure exam because last minute I just decided that's not what I wanted to do. Long story short, I started looking for opportunities to be whatever my next step would be, and none of those really were situated within the district. So I started looking externally, and I ran across these statewide fellowships. And one of the things that the fellowships did for me is it taught me about policy and advocacy, which was non-existent in my education.
At the state legislative level.
Legislative level. So state level and the local level.
Okay.
And so I thought about my own life, and from the lens of civic engagement, I didn't really learn about that in school. I didn't learn how local government operated, really how state government. We learned federal from having to take a semester of government, right? But not really how the system actually works. So I learned how to work for a system as an educator, but I didn't know how the system worked in the educational system worked from a legislative standpoint. So those fellowships did that for me. Part of the fellowships, I had to do a project. And the organization that I launched was part of a project. Wow. Now, the thing that encouraged me was when I got into those spaces, very similar to some of my experience as a teacher, they made a selection of educators across the state. One organization chose 50 educators. I was the only black male educator chosen. Another organization chose 20 some odd people. I was the only person of color chosen. So it made me feel as if like this is an important opportunity, but there's an underrepresentation of people from diverse backgrounds within it. And so my mind started reeling like, I would love to see people from different backgrounds represented in this space. Yeah. How do we make that happen? And to be clear, we show up as educators every day working in classrooms across systems across the country and in this state and in this district. But there are people making decisions about education that impact you adversely and tell you what you can and cannot do. Yeah, right. And that is the space that I had gained access to through those fellowships. Wow. And so I'm like, who better to inform what we can and can't do and what's right and what's wrong and how does it show up on the implementation on the ground levels than the people who are actually doing the job. Yeah. And particularly the underrepresented population of folks who oftentimes don't gain access to that space. Sure. So I said, okay, I want to do two things. How do I support educators from diverse backgrounds to stay in the profession? That way they can have that same effect that I had on kids like who wouldn't be able to otherwise get that, one. But then two, if we can keep them here, how do we translate their leadership, their lived experiences, their expertise, their values and perspectives to influence policy and legislation so we can make the space better? So that's where the whole idea came from. TECA was launched, Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance. I started September 2016, my last year teaching. Wow. And I kind of carried the work with me. I ended up leaving the classroom after 2017 academic year. I transitioned to the Nashville Teacher Residency as their director of recruitment. Primarily my job was to recruit Black and brown folks to Middle Tennessee, particularly Nashville, and train them to be teachers. I actually brought that work to Clarksville. So you see all the work going on in Clarksville to grow your own and the teacher residency work. The initial partnership was between CMCSS and the National Teacher Residency through work that I was leading in Nashville and had brought to the district. Yeah. While I did that, I also had a second full-time job, which was like, how do I build a nonprofit? Doing your point that you asked earlier, when you don't know what the heck you're doing and the leap of faith.
How are you going to sustain yourself?
Sustain it?
You got a family.
I will say the driving motivation was my wife. She, I kept kind of like, I got this ideal, I got this thing, and she was like, just do it. Like, fill out like, you won't know how to navigate how to do it unless you're actually doing it. And I'm like, that makes so much sense. Yeah. And so that's how I got started. I started the paperwork and a lot of bumps and not bumped my head along the way, but slowly but surely figured it out, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's powerful. So did you notice that when you were seeing, you talked a lot about retention of these teachers, of staying in the profession. Yeah. So do you notice that it was an issue kind of more of recruitment of people into the profession, or is it a both and then people coming in and realizing, I don't feel comfortable here, I don't feel like I'm supported here, and then giving them support so that they would stay in the profession?
Yeah, I think it's both and. So I did the job of recruitment. And what I realized is around that time, everybody realized like our education system and the students in there are just growing more and more diverse. Right now in the state of Tennessee, we have 1 million students across the state. 40% of those students identify as something other than white, so non-white. Student of color, some capacity. Our educator workforce, though, over the last 20 years hasn't moved as much. So in the last 20 years, we've probably grown 4%. Out of the almost 70,000 teachers in the state of Tennessee, roughly 14% identify as something other than white. So the problem I saw was like, it's both and, but you got to recruit with retention in mind. So it's like, I'm not going to bring you to the profession unless I know I got the conditions to sustain you, or at least give you something that allow you to get there. But the problem that we run into, there's a lot of recruitment efforts that bring people to the profession. It's the staying part. Yes. We lose more teachers, particularly teachers of color, than we recruit. So we have all these efforts to recruit, but when folks are leaving in droves, that's what a huge part of the leak is at. And that's not to say we can't do a better job with recruitment. You got things like Grow Your Own and the teacher residency, particularly here, that's gotten national attention in Clarksville. But if you don't have the conditions that allow someone to be sustained, access to leadership development, mentorship, conditions in which if they are in a space where they're one of a few, they still feel warm, welcome, supported, and valued. If those things aren't there, you can't expect anybody to stay.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. So when did you first start to notice that TECA had the ability to reach maybe beyond what you felt like the original vision of it was?
Yeah. I started feeling that at the end of my last year teaching. I started seeing like, when the ideal of doing it, and I started meeting people in Nashville, I was driving to Nashville like 2 or 3 days a week after school. I get off work, drive to Nashville, because I would have met somebody and I wanted to follow up with them.
Yeah.
And
this is before Zoom.
This is before Zoom. This is before Zoom, audience, right? Before Zoom. Leaving work and driving 45, 50, 60 minutes to try to get somewhere and have a face-to-face with somebody. But what I realized was there was nothing in Tennessee that existed that did that kind of work. Wow. There was no hub. There was no nexus that was really saying, I'm going to commit to supporting educator diversity in our Tennessee state. And so when I realized there was a void, it really made me feel like I had nothing to lose here. Yeah. I mean, I'm a servant leader anyway. So if I fall flat for trying, then my goodness, at least we tried. And then maybe there's some lessons we learned there that we can impart to other folks. But it was that last year teaching. And as I began to talk to people across the state, people started acknowledging like, oh, there's nothing like that exists. Like we would love to kind of engage in something like that. So part of my beginnings were like driving to people to try to get people to talk me off a ledge to make sure I wasn't crazy. And then as they affirmed it, it kind of gave me the motivation to drive further.
Yeah, and you know, there's a reality of it too, that your life experiences and what had led you to that point also create this dynamic of like, there's no one better to push this initiative forward.
That's right.
You've got the experience.
That's right.
You've got the intellect. You've got the relationships, the network, the drive, the motivation. All of these things make you the person. Right. And if you are not going to do it, and I've shared this on some other episodes, But when we have vision that I think God
That's right.
gives us, and when we have skills and networks and all these resources that God gives us, and then we withhold bringing that into the world,
That's right.
we're really negatively benefiting, negatively impacting our community, whether that is just CMCSS or like you're doing on a statewide and national level.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, as a matter of fact, it's funny you said vision. I had gave a talk to the youth at church a couple Sundays ago, Youth Sunday, and it was about vision. It was about passion versus purpose and really leaning in and kind of grabbing a hold of your vision.
So what'd you tell them about passion versus purpose?
I think that, passion a lot of times is what you want to do.
Okay.
Purpose is what you're called to do.
Wow.
And sometimes those things can vary. If they're in alignment, it's a beautiful thing. Because if it doesn't feel like work. But sometimes we can be disgruntled with our purpose. Right? I'm supposed to do this. I am called to do this. I don't want to do this.
Yes.
But I think sometimes to your point, when we don't do that, the benefit, the need, the support that folks need from a servant and a giving and a loving perspective, they lack that because you won't do what you're called to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
That'll put you in the right spot in your brain, huh?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So tell us a little bit about the current efforts of TECA.
Yep.
And what is your, what would you say your mission is right now?
Yep.
And what are some action steps that you're doing on a regular basis to really kind of grow and make a dynamic impact through TECA?
Yep. So I would say broadly, the mission that I have right now is the value that people place on the diverse backgrounds of professionals that kids get to see early on. So the place that you show up every day almost for 13 years, K-12 space, has an adverse effect on the value of what you see diverse backgrounds represented broadly in the workforce development space. Yeah. So when you go see some of these places and you're like, oh, I don't see many people who look like me there. You almost sometimes choose not to expect it because you didn't see it. You never, and sometimes folks have to see images and reflections of themselves that way they can even envision it. Yeah. And this is not just something in the education workforce. This is across the law field. Right. This is across the medical field.
I do remember when I was in dental school and I started to think critically about my life growing up here and maybe how it differed from some other people. Maybe they different economic background, different, ethnicity, or whatever it may be. And this was one of the conversations where I really had to kind of address and kind of say to myself there was never a time where I didn't think I could do something.
Right.
Because
right.
I knew a handful of people who were accountants, who were lawyers, who were dentists, who were teachers, who were whatever, who looked like me, who were my Little League baseball coaches, who went to school with my dad or whatever. I never had a thought of I can't do that. Right. And really everything that I saw as something that was desirable for my life, I knew that I had access to it. Right. And I took that for granted. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us do who grow up in well-connected communities. Right. And it wasn't until I had some really great friends and great relationships who said, that wasn't my childhood. That's right. I remember I said, talking to a friend in Memphis, she said, I never thought about being a dentist.
Right.
I never saw a dentist that looked like me.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, man. I think, to that point, so part of my mission is how do I address that stigma? I want to get rid of, and it's an advantageous goal, but I want people to be able to say, you know what, I did have access to somebody who reflected my background or who didn't reflect my background, but I don't commune with regularly, right? And I understood a cultural perspective and a different perspective in a way that I valued it. That way, as I grow older and I go through college and I get into the workforce, I'm not shocked and surprised. I can lean into that and see that as a value add. So that's one thing. The other part is that how do I take that broader community of educators that I'm serving and then people who value that level of diversity and racial ethnicity and multilinguisticness and translate those folks into advocates through understanding policy and advocacy. And so 3 things that we do, we support teacher candidates of color that are training to be teachers in Tennessee state schools, universities and colleges.
Yeah, in universities and colleges, sure.
People may not know this, but folks, when they student teach, they don't get compensated for that. So you got somebody who lives in who's going to school in Nashville or student teaching in Nashville, but because Nashville's so expensive, they may live 45, 50 minutes out.
Oh, wow.
A lot of the people that I support are first generation college students. Many of them are working 30 hours a week. As a matter of fact, yesterday was my birthday. I had dinner with 2 of the teacher candidates from Austin Peay last night. they're in the same boat. They're working 30, 35 hours a week, but when they're dreading student teaching, because when you're student teaching, you're working from 6:30 in the morning to 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it eliminates your ability to get 30, 35 hours.
Right.
And if you're a person that doesn't live on campus, you have expenses, it cuts into your ability to take care of yourself. Yeah. Not only that, like, it's also the reality of navigating a profession, academic major and a college of education where many people don't look like you. The professors don't look like you. Yeah. And so we support those folks by giving them access to mentors who look like them. We give them a stipend to help them out with their expenses. We give them access to supplementary programming to help them understand the realities of, you may graduate and take a job somewhere and you may be the only Latinx person in the building and you have to help translate it. You have to, those are real things that I don't think the broad education profession in the collegiate level prepares you for. So that's one thing. Another group is our in-service educators, so people who serve in buildings on the ground. Could be counselors, could be coaches, could be teachers, but it's a leadership development program that allows them to understand how policy and advocacy works, and it positions them to be able to take a inequity that they identified. So it could be like discipline issues, it could be curriculum, it could be whatever it is that they see as, I'm the person who may be uniquely positioned to address that because of my lived experience, my keen perspective, and we position them to be able to take that challenge on. The ideal is for them not to complete and like address that challenge fully within the academic year, but it's to give them the start to kind of throughout the year, that way they can say, here, I looked at a problem that started here and I got it closer here. And it got closer here because I took what I learned and I applied it. Yep. And hopefully what happens is at the end of that experience, they're motivated to keep making that change because they see the value that it will bring to other educators and the students that they serve. And then the last thing that we do is we take the broader community, so community stakeholders, parents, educators, anybody who values educational equity, and we put them into this advocacy academy. It's a shorter version of a 5-week program that kind of gives them the lay of the land of how does policy work at the federal level, the state level, the local level, and then how can they plug in? Do you need to lean in at a school board meeting, a city council, county commissioner? A lot of people don't understand is that, the energy that we have is misplaced. Sometimes we see things going wrong in education. I blame the principal. I blame this. I blame that. Yeah. Ultimately, you have a superintendent who proposes a budget that gets approved by a school board. But when there's a shortfall in the money, most of the time a county commission and city councilmen are making decisions to vote about money to make up shortfalls. Well, those are all elected positions, right? So literally your energy is misplaced because the people who are literally going to make the decision of what you care about the most, which comes down to dollars and cents that's situated somewhere in the budget, is someone that you either voted or did not vote for. So we have to get people more civically engaged, because if they aren't, it's misplaced energy. And I would tell you right now, the biggest challenges that we're facing in education are situated in policy and legislation right now. Period. Full stop.
What is so you're blowing my mind. It's not something that I have a good handle on. I don't have a lot of context for it. I understand what you were saying in terms of how the budget is set. But, if you can, give me an example of what is something legislatively in the education system that is a challenge right now that you look at and you say, I'm uniquely positioned to speak into this issue because of my lived experience, or what is just something that's being discussed at, let's say, Tennessee Department of Education, and then state representatives and senators are discussing how to handle it. What's an issue that could be an example of that?
I give two. One was a success, one that we actually advocated for organizationally, and then one that I think is more recent, more pressing. So the win that we had, Tennessee has always had legislation for like 30 years that we were required to have this diversity policy. Initially, it was around setting goals of how we can recruit more black folks to the education profession. Every district was going to have a goal. They're going to have systems about the recruitment and retention. For 30 years, that never existed. The law existed that we were supposed to have a policy. The policy was never created. So I did a fellowship at the Tennessee Department of Education and found out this law. And I was like, well, technically, we're breaking the law because we don't have a policy. And so one of the early wins of TECA was bringing educators across the state and leveraging our influence with the Department of Education to help create the language behind this educator diversity policy. So they changed the language from a policy that was just situated around African Americans, and it got more broad to just anybody from a racial ethnic background that was other than white. And so I gave testimony at the State Board of Education. We brought educators together to speak to their elected, appointed their appointed state board members, and that policy was adopted unanimously.
Wow.
But it was the leveraging of people who had the expertise from urban, suburban, rural communities that could literally lean in and give context to why this is even important.
That's powerful. Who then is maybe responsible for executing that? Is that at the school board level? Is that at the individual school level? Who would you say we're identifying these people? Now that we have the policy in place, we want you to execute it.
Yep. So it's threefold. The district is required to create the goal. So how many people they're looking to recruit and retain, what they're going to do and how they're going to recruit and retain. The State Department is responsible for holding them accountable.
The district,
right? The district accountable. Okay. So the goals that you get in the strategies that you're going to use, you're going to submit that to the State Board of to the State Department. The State Department is going to hold you accountable. The State Department is also going to report on that data too as well. And then the State Board of Education is kind of like the broader umbrella. They're just kind of making sure everybody does what it's supposed to do. Cool. It's hard though, like because the policy got adopted.
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot of people. It's a lot of moving parts to hold people accountable. It's a lot of moving
parts, and anytime you're dealing in government, it moves a little slower than you want it to. But it is. I think it's a great story to say this is something that had existed for a number of years. We identified a gap, and through policy, through working together across the state, we created this change. And now hopefully we can use this change to continue our momentum, continue moving forward. That is a huge win for your organization. Are there, when you look at what you've done, let's say since 2017, are there some other wins that you look at and you say, man, I'm really proud of this achievement that we've had?
Yep. So to date, between teacher candidates, teachers, more broader educator, people that have gone through our program, we've served over 150 people through programming. And the one thing I would say is that all of our programming, we value educators so much, so we leverage 40% of our budget to put in the hands of educators. So everybody gets a stipend, anywhere between $2,500 all the way down to $1,000. So because we understand, like, people are, it's not the most. You can get rich in education, but you're not going to come out making $100,000 out the gate in Tennessee.
Yeah, and what you pointed out earlier is a gap that I never really thought about, because that student teaching is a part of this process, right? But you don't sometimes think about how some student teachers may be pinched in other ways that others may not be.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So I think that's one thing that we pride ourselves on, is the ability to financially be able to support these folks, but to be able to have built our network is like 4,000 people across the state, and it's inclusive. So it's not just black and brown teachers, it's white educators and black and brown educators and community members and allies and community stakeholders who all value teacher diversity. And so the fact that we've been able to grow a network, sustain and support educators from various parts of this pipeline, and then also the testimonials that we get. Sometimes you get so entrenched in the work, and it's like, man, I feel like I'm doing a good job, but I really don't know. And the biggest thing that I'm always proud about is like when I meet people across the state and they feel like they know me better than I know them, and they're able to point out something, that a training that they were able to go to, or connect in a way with another member in the network that they probably wouldn't have if they weren't. That's always like that. Okay, we're actually doing something that's meaningful here. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like that's amazing. Let's talk about maybe student achievement and how student achievement is a part of what you do, or it's maybe not a part of what you do, but are you using any benchmarks for student achievement and how it relates to the teachers that you recruit, retain, support, and how is it affecting students?
That's right. I appreciate the question. So statistically and historically, data have always showed that when students have access to teachers from diverse backgrounds, they perform better. So all students. So whether if you're black or brown,
I would perform better.
Absolutely, black or brown students, particularly chronic absenteeism goes down, discipline rates go down, academic achievement goes up, access to honors, dual enrollment, AP courses goes up. And then for white students, the cultural responsiveness, the ability to be able to engage interculturally, the ability to be able to understand different lived perspectives, all of that is a value add. And so we leverage that ideal of like, hey, this is not us just saying, hey, let's, and not treating it as a silver bullet by no stretch, but statistically and from a data standpoint, when folks have access to a diverse cadre of educators, students from all backgrounds can perform better. So we lean in on that, and we also lean in on that from a economic development perspective too, and from an investment perspective. Again, what you choose to put in front of students early on will impact their ability to see value in different workspaces. If I don't see myself represented, I may not go work in a place geographically or professionally. And so I the thing I will say is, to go into your point about students, we've struggled in Clarksville and across the state, for the last 20 years, unfortunately, as we're thinking about this ideal of student achievement. Black students for the last 20 years have been in the bottom in performance in all statistical categories, any subject, across subjects. Latinx students are next, and then at the top are Asian students and white students. And now I would think that I know people personally in this district and across the state that are putting their boots on and getting in rooms and then going to the max, trying to do the best they can for students. But broadly and historically, and when we zoom out and we look at the bigger picture, the narrative has been consistently the same. And so what does that say about us of how we're teaching and how we show up and what we're providing when we consistently, year over year, that data looks the same across subjects, across different. And so to me, it's not a silver bullet, but it also makes the work more meaningful. It's like, if this is an area that we know historically and statistically that can make an impact, we should lean here a little bit more particularly. And that was one reason why I was like, we need something that's exclusively focuses there, while we have all these other things going on, how to teach people how to read, and different areas of how we can teach people how to learn math. But we also need something that's exclusively dedicated to our talent, which is the work that I'm engaged in.
That's awesome. How do you feel like some of this experience, what you've learned, pivoting gears here a little bit and changing subject, how do you feel like that has influenced you as a family man, as dad, raising your sons and daughters, as a husband of a teacher, right? How has your accumulated experience as a professional in this area affected that?
Yeah, I will say I'm blessed and privileged because I know how to navigate the education system. So when I look at colleagues and I see sometimes like, their children are more than qualified to be in a dual enrollment or honors course or AV course, they don't even necessarily know how to advocate, speak out to a principal or a counselor or the right source to be able to say, hey, like, how did you come to that conclusion? Here's some data that I can suggest that will give you a second consideration. I could do that. I've done that. My wife has done that. We know how to navigate, and we know the best opportunity. If this is the system, we can zoom out and say, okay, we need this opportunity, this opportunity, this. One wants to be a doctor, one wants to be a lawyer. My two oldest, they're 2 years away from graduating. We know what the opportunities that exist and how to navigate towards them that could potentially best position them to get them where they're trying to go. That's a different type of thing. It's like riding the bus in Clarksville and getting off at the transit and knowing what the transit If not, you're just going to sit on the bus. You're just going to go for the ride. Now, you might end up getting where you're trying to go, but you don't have the insight to be able to do it. So I think being involved in this work and learning from educators across the state and kind of having a broader zoom out of like what's at the state level and how it filters down to district levels, it gives me a better insight of how not only I can be a better parent to my children, but like, how can I support them in their academic journeys? And that's extremely important, especially when you say, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer. You know this. You've gone on a journey academically that didn't end for several years. And I would imagine some of the decisions that you were able to make afforded to you by the network and the opportunity that you had, it put you in a better position to pursue that. For folks who don't know that, and they may be wanting to go there, they're not going to be, I mean, I would argue, may not be as set up for the opportunities of success.
And the challenge is when the system is so structured, if you get behind, unless you have someone strongly advocating for you, it's hard to reposition your angle down this lane, right? You can say you get past high school, you get into college. If you're not selecting the right courses over the summer before you enroll to know how to kind of navigate this, what I saw at Austin Peay is students would try to maybe redirect their course into a professional medical program. But if it's your second or third year, to try to combine all of these science classes in together, it became insurmountable, right? So you really did have to have some keen advice and wisdom, people who knew the system and could help navigate that. Well, I asked that question because I've always looked at you as a mentor in parenting, and as parents, we're all just trying to figure out what to do. We want to see our kids succeed. We know that our own life experiences lead our families in a certain way.
That's right.
But your boys, especially, they're, I've watched them grow up. I remember very young experiences with them, and to see them step into this like middle teenage year of like that 15, 16-year-old, and they've always been, at least from what I can tell, very confident in themselves, very confident in the trajectory that you and Brittany have set out for them, the vision that you've had for their life, the belief that you've had in them, the words of empowerment and the words of just success that you speak into them, both verbally and in writing. Like, I've seen it all, and then I've seen it come to fruition. Yeah. And so I know that work extends into what you're doing at TECA. Absolutely. And that influence, like when somebody's been around you, I can't not say those things to my kids, right? Yeah. Like, oh man, look at Reese, look at how he's raised these young men, these daughters of dignity, that they are, just showing all of the gifts that the Lord has given them, but y'all have nurtured that. And so I commend you for that. You've always been somebody that I look at and like, man, he's a great dad, just super smart. I knew that when I met you at Northeast Middle, and to see where you are now is really a privilege to see. It's very special to see your old friends. As much as we don't want to be like the adults in the world now, we still want to kind of be young adults, but we're transitioning into like adults now. OGs. Yeah, all the real OGs are laughing at us, but we feel that pressure. And so I want to say thank you for
appreciate you, man.
Really looking at this transition in your career of going from something that I feel like was probably very stable and predictable for you to taking a big leap of faith into an arena that, let's just be honest, in Tennessee is probably not all the time well received. That's right. And yet you're using your gifts and you're using it with grace and, probably more skill than many of us have, to muster from. So you're doing important work. I think what you're doing is amazing. I think it's incredible that you're doing it from Clarksville. You're one of those stories of people who are living here. Your kids are going to school here. Brittany's got her own businesses. She's got her hands in all kinds of things. And it's people like you in Clarksville who are making this the greatest place to live in America. That's what we tell that's what the show's about.
Man, I appreciate it, man. I think the same about you, man. I appreciate you just as much. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, hey, if you have made it to the end of this episode today, I know that you found just incredible value in what my friend Dr. George has shared with you, both as his journey through CMCSS and then now through TECA, the important work that he's doing all across our state, really influencing the lives of educators. But then we also talked about how it directly influences the lives of students, which I think is the end goal of why educators do what they do. I'm going to keep bringing you stories like this, people like Dr. George, who you may not have heard about. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, TECA is something that I want to know more about, we'll leave some contact info in the show notes, or he's not a hard guy to find and get a hold of. I've seen him networking at events. He's passing business cards left and right, trying to grow his organization, connecting with people who have whatever type of interest in the education field. My mom was an educator, so to all you educators out there, thank you for what you do. It's incredible. It's an incredibly important work, and most of what you do goes unnoticed. And so for anyone out there in the education field, I want to say thank you so much for what you do. But hey, thanks for tuning in to the end of this episode. Hit like, follow, subscribe, whatever it tells you to do to keep catching this great content, because we're going to keep bringing you stories like Dr. George of people who are living in our community, making a difference all across town. Thank you so much.